As I mentioned in my email, I'm a little nervous. Usually I share things that I've been sharing and processing for a while. This is the first time I share some of these thoughts aloud and in some form of what I'm hoping is coherence. You'll tell me if it's coherent or not. My aim is that we will get to some conversation, but I haven't quite timed how long it'll take me to share these thoughts. So I want to start by mentioning that I graduated with a Master's of the Arts in Law and Diplomacy from the Fletcher School in the year 2000. And that's important because 2000 was right before 2001. And that's when September 11th happened. So the kind of beginning of a new world order, right, started then. But I bring my credentials in international law and diplomacy to assert that just with what has been done in terms of American international relations in the last 3 months, that can't be undone. Like, it's like the illusion of a certain order and a certain place has been broken. It has been dispelled. I'm not saying that different administrations could not try to mend some relationships, but like the world order that has held together since the Second War, especially so after the fall of communism, um, that order is now done. There's no, there's literally no going back. Like once people think that see that, oh, this can happen, then they have to prepare. The rest of the world has to prepare for the fact that it might happen again, right? Up until now, it was something that couldn't happen, right? And now it can. So there's already at the level of world order something that is done that cannot be undone. I want to honor, name, accept that we are in the grip of a very dangerous, reactionary authoritarianism. That's what's happening. An aggressive dismantling of a set of institutions. And that's serious and that's real. And in fact, I believe, like I think most of you, that is that we need to do something. But if we are here, if you're joining me in this conversation, you're at least toying with the possibility that the playbook that we have for taking action is obsolete, right? So we have to do something, but many of us here have been in activism, in justice for a long time, for decades. And so we can say we have to do something, but the way in which we know how to do something seems to have run its course. That's at least what we we are at least hold that as a possibility during this time, right? So we want to take action, but to take action, we would rely on a playbook that has gotten us here in some way. Um, and so if you felt a little triggered or upset when I said a playbook that has gotten us here, I'm a big fan of doing our part to take responsibility. It feels like a much more empowered stance. And so the other thing we want to be careful with is coming into this conversation with the idea of we have been right. You know what I mean? There's just been all this other interest and all these power plays and these other bad things and racism and all of these things. I'm not they're there. But I also want us to relax the posture of we have been right. I think our values are good, right? But something about our moves has landed us here. And I just think it's essential for us to be humble enough in this conversation to open to that possibility. The other thing I want to say is that before this kind of revolutionary, because that's what this is, it happens to be the wrong side, but it is a revolutionary endeavor that we're suffering under. Um, the status quo was composed of a slow burning consensus. So we have been kind of slow burn towards um, kind of neoliberalism, towards the wealthy, the new gilded age, certainly towards the exhaustion of the planet, right? And so let's be clear about that. Like there's something about what was before that was not as revolutionary, but was a slow burn for a long time in a dangerous direction. I'm not saying it was all bad. I'm not saying I'm glad we're getting rid of it because I'm not. But I just want to like say there's been a kind of uh, a consensus trance, right? That has had a slow burn quality. It's eventually moving towards this tipping point. So we have a political and economic tipping point, and we have a climatic tipping point around the corner, right? So those things are what happens. By now, most of us are familiar, or many of us. I don't want to pretend I know where everybody's coming from with the idea of adaptive change. Adaptive change, and that's some of the work of a leadership teacher out of uh, uh, the Harvard Kennedy School, Ron Heifetz, and he made a distinction between technical change and adaptive change. So technical change is like things are generally right, right? We just got to keep making it right within the system that we have. And adaptive change is change that happens at the level of values, beliefs, assumptions, right? And so what I'm proposing, and I'm not alone in this, is that what we need right now is that the only option that's left for us is adaptive change. We've been talking about adaptive change for decades, but right now, if we're having gotten hit by the truth that that's what we need, then we have more things to do, and probably some letting go of identities that we've held for a long time. I'm going to oversimplify my definition of liberalism. I'm going to say it is composed of individual freedom, of equal rights, of democracy, and of the rule of law. And it is held together by institutions. It made possible large scale and relatively diverse societies, right? And I say relatively because they often look more diverse than they are, right? They demand a kind of like buying into its own belief, homogeneity, even in diversity. But they are able to hold different peoples together beyond what might be considered a more instinctive tendency towards tribalism. And that is a miracle in human history. That's just something that that has rarely been seen. Not never been seen, but rarely been seen. There's been other cosmopolitan places through history, but this kind of scale has been really special, a really powerful thing. The other thing about liberalism is that it is a framework that has allowed the oppressed to fight for more freedoms, to fight for justice, to fight for inclusion. So even those of us that have been excluded by the promise of liberalism have wielded the promises of liberalism to demand inclusion and freedom, right? It has given us a framework, a language. Many of us, not all of us, other people have chosen more revolutionary approaches, right? But many of us in the liberal world have been like, okay, we can argue for this based on what you said, right? Based on what you told us that this is what this society is based on. Given your argument, this is what we want. So it's a very powerful framework. I want to be very clear because even though I'm talking about post-liberalism, I'm not saying like good riddance. I'm really not. Over the last 20 years, I've been largely a consultant, usually a facilitator in social movement spaces. And I noticed the tendency had been prevalent, but I noticed a strange turn the more of that work I did. And it was an anti-liberalism within those spaces, within left spaces. So I know we are here shaking by this kind of power grab of the right, right? That's a lot more effective than the anti-liberalism that was being wielded before, dangerous. But I remember I just kind of lived and rebelled against, kind of moved away, wanted to move away from that anti-liberalism. It looked like the policing of language. So a story I tell is I would be like at my house with my kid who was being educated within this kind of ideological milieu, right? And said something maybe, let's call it not politically correct. And it's noticed him as a kid, younger than he is now, looking around to make sure no one could hear us, right? So that reminds me and that kind of being in a situation where we have to whisper what we believe to each other is akin to those of us that remember what we heard about the East German state police. Except now the police was in our heads. We were monitoring ourselves, right? And we lived under a political ideology that we were associated with but we would still have to whisper. So that is not liberalism. That is not liberalism. Cancellation mobs are not liberal, right? There's no due process, right? So we come from a political stance that challenges the justice system, but then the justice system ends up providing better due process than our cancellation mobs did, right? So I'm just going to point in towards how anti-liberalism was rooted on both sides of this equation. The fact that speakers at universities were banned from speaking, right? And having like real intellectual debate, that is anti-liberalism. So I state all of this to say for a long time, my response to this problem was to try and make an argument for liberalism, right? To be like, hey, wait a minute, this is not it. Like we can't play this game because this game makes the other the enemy, right? And liberalism demands a level of tolerance so that we can have an authentic contestation of ideas, right? And I'm not saying that that there's always power underneath it all, but at least it gave us a framework where we could do that. And so for a long time, my response to this growing unease that I had among the anti-liberal posture of people I have associated with politically was to make an argument for liberalism. So it's worth naming that these postures on right and left are a response to a crisis of meaning and to a crisis of belonging, right? So that people not having connection, not having belonging, not having a shared story of meaning, people would contract and say, this is what is the truth, right? And then be afraid of anybody else that had a different truth. And so, but the problem is that we solve the crisis of belonging by building these very brittle structures of belonging. What is a brittle structure of belonging? Is a structure of belonging that is held together by the thread of exile, right? So if the only way I can hold my community together is by saying, if you step out of line, you will be exiled, right? That's a very brittle structure of belonging. The other, and then when it comes to meaning, and this is part of modernity, we we use ideology as a very weak replacement for mythos and for story. So we as human animals, through the millennia, our stories of meaning are grounded and come from mythos, right? But what modernity does is it makes our myth either a fundamentalist truth, right? So the world was created in 7 days, if you're in an Abrahamic tradition, or a scientific lie. So there's no room for mythos, right? As if our ancestors did not understand that myth was a different level of reality, right? And so then we take ideology and we superimpose it, right, to try to get what mythos gave us. But again, it doesn't go as deep, and it takes like an incredible amount of intellectual commitment to remain in it. Uh, Before I continue, let me go back in time a little bit because I already mentioned modernity. I think of liberalism as a product of modernity. There's a product of modernity. In the same way that communism is a product of modernity, neoliberal identitarianism is a product of modernity. Um, Postmodern narcissism, right, is a product of modernity. And so today, most of our focus will be on modernity as it unfolded after the Second War. But for a minute here, we'll go further back just to like lay some ground. So Professor John Powell refers to the European Enlightenment project of the isolated self, right? The European Enlightenment project of the isolated self. So the individual gets more and more isolated, which is really incredibly empowering for individuals for a long time, all the way until the pendulum swings so far that people are dying of loneliness, right? And like the self-authoring becomes this narcissistic need as opposed to like this kind of how to be together as people. But more important than even that is materialism, right? So materialism becomes the new religion. They don't call it religion; they call it science. But we cease living in a mystery, in a universe of mystery, and we start to live in a universe made of things that are separate from each other. And the thing with things is that things can be ordered, right? They can be put together to make really big machines, and things can be acquired, right? So things can be had and things can be ordered. And so now we have the scientific revolution that allows for incredible progress. It liberates us from hugely powerful structures that have the religious structures, power structures that have taken over our capacity for mythos and turned it into their tools of power, right? There's a lot of good things that happen, but really what is also happening is a disenchantment of the world. The world becomes disenchanted, right? And in that process, what the West is doing is seizing power from the gods, right? It's taking the power of the gods and bringing it down into the material world and wielding it, right, in its own arc of progress. So then, this kind of civilizing force that used to be in the early stage colonialism was all about, like, let's bring them our religion and to rule over them and take their gold. Also, then becomes, let's bring in this torch of enlightenment, this torch of European enlightenment. Let's dominate them, right? With this perspective, this materialist perspective, this scientific take on things. And so we begin to have this civilizing force that really is colonialism through modernity, right? Colonialism through, this is what progress is. This is what the good life looks like. We can get you out of the mess that you're in, the poverty that you're in, right? Through this particular frame. And you begin to dominate that way. As if you could erase the gods. That's an important thing I'm going to keep coming back to. That's at the heart of this thesis. I'm going to fast forward for a second here to a book called The End of Protest. It was written by a guy called Micah White. Micah White was one of the people that launched Occupy Wall Street through a meme, right? So it was 5 years after Wall Street. His central Occupy Wall Street. His central argument was that the neoliberal state, that we have had the best protests ever, right, in all of human history. Occupy, to the climate marches, to the war against Iraq, but the neoliberal state now knew how to absorb protest. And so his idea was that protest had ended. What I'm doing here, if you're seeing me click around, frustrating. Let me try to draw for you on a piece of paper, because I think it's important to see this. Structuralism. Imagine I spelled this correctly. Structuralism, right? So in structuralism, as we say, the revolution begins when the price of bread is too high. Basically, nobody can make the revolution happen. The price of bread gets high enough, the people revolt, right? Next to structuralism, you have voluntarism. And that's what many of us on this call believe in and have believed in. We can be agents for the revolution. We get out there as active agents and help the revolution to happen. If you notice, both of these are in the material world, right? The objective realm. Above it, we have subjectivism. This one's a good one for the goop crowd. Subjectivism. Change myself, change the world, right? Like, I'm going to meditate, and because my relationship to reality is going to change, all of reality is going to change, right? And here's the one. So basically, the whole point of this quadrant is that modernity doesn't leave room for what's here. And you don't know what's here yet, but that modernity has no space for this. What's here, forgive the word, right? What's here, because it's not mine, and it's a complicated word, is theurgism. I will use a new word in a minute, but I want to be Theurgism. Theurgism. What does theurgism mean? What kind of word is that? Well, Surrealism for me, the way I make sense of it is I call it the realm of the gods, the realm of the gods, right? But what it literally means is a mystical and esoteric practice that involves invoking divine or supernatural powers, right? So, for example, our ancestors would never go to war or start the planting season without painting their faces, beating their drums, and doing the war dance, right? And let's say they went to war and they lost, right? They weren't gonna come back and be like, okay, well, we're not gonna do the war dance next time. They were gonna do the war dance harder, right? So there's something about I can't. It's like structuralism, in like I can't control things. I can't control things, right? But it's in the spiritual realm, like subjectivism, right? In this kind of shared unconscious realm, right? So that we're gonna keep coming back to surrealism because that's the part that modernity takes out of the equation. And part of what I'm saying here is that that's a missing part. That's a part that we have cared for and paid attention to through the millennia, right? And uh, here we are imagining it doesn't matter, like trying to think the gods away. But getting rid of the gods is a slow process because they're really embedded, right? So then modernity ends up in this terrible crisis in the beginning of the 20th century. It has a world war that is the most devastating horror that the world has ever seen, right? Then 20 years later, it has another one that is even worse, right? That finishes with the worst weapons that the world has ever seen, right? And so this sends the whole civil. Now these are the forces of civilization, right? Like they've been taking down people, they've been taking from people, they've been globalizing forever because they are civilized, right? And here we are with with a carnage that we can barely understand. We can barely understand, right? Some of the children of Holocaust survivors on the call have a clearer sense of what we're talking about with an impossible carnage. That sets up an existential crisis, right? An existential crisis for liberalism. And so what does that mean? We have a problem, and the problem is diagnosed as the problem of a closed society. It's the problem of a closed society. And a closed society is held together by strong gods, right? So we have the problem of strong gods. What are those strong gods? I'm going to list them and we'll keep coming back to this. So there are strong beliefs, strong truth claims, strong moral codes, strong relational bonds, strong communal identities, connections to place and past. I'll say them again because this is central to what we're talking about. Strong beliefs, strong truth claims, strong moral codes, strong relational bonds, strong communal identities, connection to place and past. Those are the strong gods. And they got to be tamed. They got to be tamed because they lead people to murder each other at gigantic rates, right? So what is the solution? An open society, right? A global village. The thing is, those sound really good. I'm a fan. I don't want you to leave thinking I don't like an open society and a global village. But part of the problem is that it can be run by a technocratic elite, right? It's run by a technocratic elite. And somewhere in there, integral to it, is a very limited idea of what a free market is, right? So it's run by elites that know better, and it has its free markets, and we ignore the fact that free markets allow for the free movement of finance around the world, but labor is still captive, right, within borders. And so what this does is it reinforces the civilizing mindset, right? Now, Remember, both communism and liberalism want to quash the strong gods. It's not just liberalism, right? But liberalism seems to win out in the end, at least in the short term. And it becomes this civilizing force, this new way to promote development around the world through these civilizing ideas. And so, but it's important to name that today, the educated elite, and I'm gonna invite us to consider ourselves among the educated elite, regardless of whether we come from colonized or oppressed people or not. The educated elite uh, thrive through these times, and they're best described by the acronym WEIRD. WEIRD. So WEIRD is Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. It's important to name that the weird people of the world in the world are still a minority. They're the dominant minority. They rule the world, but they are a minority. We are the product of liberalism. But around the world, the strong gods still hold sway. When you ask people around the world to introduce themselves, they're not going to tell you what their administrative jobs are, right? They're going to tell you who they're the son or sibling of, daughter of. They're going to tell you what village they come from. They identify their tribe or their religious group, right? This is how they know themselves. So we are weird, right? And most of the world still not. Let's talk a little bit about how this difference plays out here in the United States. The biggest political fault line in our country right now, in the United States, I know there's people that are not from the United States, is educational. Right? It's not left or right. It's educated or uneducated. This makes me think of a book. I'm sorry, I'm feeling a little wheezy for a second. A
Let's take
book gets written in 2004 called What's the Matter with Kansas? And it's looking at this distinction. It's saying, why do people in Kansas vote against their own interest, their own economic interest? And this is a big mystery. And the way I understand that is we take Maslow's hierarchy of needs to be too linear. So the hierarchy of needs starts with like safety, the needs of safety, the needs of belonging and love come after, the need of esteem comes after that, the need for self-actualization follows it. So liberal elites are like, if we give people a social safety net, we can take care of their need for safety. That cheats. So here it is, the challenge that I want to pose, and it's a central proposition of the argument, and why this is a talk about post-liberalism rather than a talk about how to save liberalism, is what if the strong gods are real? What if the strong gods are real? What if they are part of what makes us human? What do we do then? What do we do with that? Here's a description of the strong gods: the objects of people's love and devotion, sources of passions and loyalties that unite societies. Right? What if they matter? What if it's total hubris, right? To try to like write over them. The stance of the elite has been to re-educate, right? These people are superstitious in some way. We can re-educate them, which is another way to say, so to tell them truth that don't make sense to them based on all kinds of ideological conclusions, right? Re-educate them, which is to say, civilize them. We're back to the same game, right? So we superimpose ideologies on people, right? And leave them without whatever it was that the strong gods are able to meet. I want to repeat over and over again. The strong gods are dangerous. They are dangerous. I have gone through a stage in my life when I've been a nationalist, like a Puerto Rican nationalist, right? And when I've been a religious fundamentalist as part of my upbringing, right? And later on, when I've been under the grip of the dogma of racial justice, right? So all of these things are absolutist. So I know what it's like to be under the spell of some strong gods. I can testify of the limiting danger of these powers. I reiterate, they are the cause of war and death through the ages. But they are here, right? They're ever ready for stirring. They can be stirred up at any time. And so what do we do with that? We cast them into the shadow. We take them and we cast them into the shadow, which is the hubris of the last 400 years. That our materialism mindset is more right than millennia of human understanding, right? And so what happens when you take something into the shadows? It comes out sideways. It comes out sideways over and over again. It happens in our personal lives and it happens in our cultural and social lives. This is most obvious right now under the power of the empowered right, the right that has a policy, the power to govern, right? But remember, we mentioned there's absolutism in the left. There is identitarian essentialism, right? We still this looking for who am I, right? There's the binaries of good and evil on the left, the us versus them, and of course, central justified resentment, right? An ideology that justifies resentment. This is true on the left as well as on the right. So again, I'm going to keep repeating it. The strong gods are dangerous, but casting them into the shadow doesn't seem wise. Just this week, my friend Julian Norris wrote a beautiful piece, and in it, he reminds us that the old stories remind us of a simple truth, that it is only when we stop denying or fleeing the devourer, only when we stop denying or fleeing the devourer and consciously turn to face it, right? We stop fleeing the devourer, consciously turn to face it, that we discover the potential for something like initiation, right? So what I'm proposing is the strong gods are trouble. They're here. We have to try to like to write them off. It hasn't worked. They keep showing up rather than just like imagine them away. How can we turn towards them, face them, and see what initiation is available to us in that process? Again, how dare we pit 400 years of thought, mainly European, against millennia of human wisdom, and to go and take over the earth with that ideology, right? What does it yield? It yields an empty prosperity. Empty prosperity. It also yields anxiety, depression, a crisis of loneliness, consumerism, and over-medication is what we're left with, right? And so all at the same time, we're ravishing the planet in the most counter-evolutionary move that we could have come up with. So once again, the whole thing, the whole game eats the planet away. We are the first people to steal from our descendants at this scale. We're like robbing from the future, right? This is an important part of where this move leaves us. So then the question is, what do we do with the strong gods instead? What do we do? Well, what do we do with the shadow? We seek to integrate it. We face it, we look at it, we seek to integrate it. And integration is beyond insight. So if you're like resonating with what I'm saying at the level of insight or understanding, that's not enough for integration, right? That's not integration. That's getting something, right? But integration is lived and practiced as relational embodiment, right? It is in our body. This is how we live and practice these understandings. It is a creative engagement with the mystery, right? It's a humble and creative engagement with the mystery. The enchantment here, let me tell you, like another mind trick is what modernity does is it looks at culture and pretends that culture produces the sacred, right? But like the sacred is how did we even come into being? The sacred is the mountain and the heavens, right? That precedes culture. The sacred is upstream from culture. It's not a product of culture, right? And so that's part of what we're trying to do here. It's a creative engagement with the mystery. This kind of engagement, what it leads us is some of the key fights we start to fight here include the fight to see the stars, but not on spaceships from the stars, but with our backs against the earth. Like, how have we become people that can no longer see the stars? Like, is it any wonder that we have lost our way? People that have always been stargazers, right? This is some of the medicine, some of the antidote to what we're talking about. So, a brief note, and I'm looking at the time, I want to make sure we do talk some here, and it's not just me talking at you. A brief note on other ways to work with what I'm saying. A reminder that we humans long for the same thing. We long to die old and in peace, surrounded by grandchildren who are doing well and who remember what is essential, what is most important about how to be human together upon this sacred earth. If we can't get that, if we don't have that, what else do we long for? We long to live lives of righteous struggle, right? Worthy lives, lives of sacrifice, so that our descendants can have the thing we can't have. So that somewhere along the line, our descendants can start to die old and in peace, surrounded by their grandchildren who remember what is sacred and most important. So let's remember that we have that in common. Let's remember that actually, when we're not afraid, we're good and kind. All of us. There might be some exceptions. There's always a problem here and there. But generally speaking, the vast majority of us are good and kind. So I am almost there. I want to name that Nicholas Christakis wrote a book called The Blueprint. And what he did is he studied societies, online, shipwreck societies, old societies, animal societies, and he determined that humans share what he called a social suite, and he called it a set of innate social behaviors. He's saying they're innate that shape cooperation, friendship, and well-being, and that when a society worked, it exhibits these 8 parts of a social suite. So I'm just going to read them. The capacity to have and recognize individual identity. So I'm not talking about the isolated self, but individual identity. Love for partners and offspring. Friendship. Social networks. And I'm naming this because this is what we got to think about when we're trying to tend to the problem, right? Like, are we bringing more of this? Are we making this possible? Social networks, and I don't mean Facebook, right? I mean like actual human connection. Cooperation. We have a capacity to cooperate. I'm going to put an asterisk here because this one keeps showing up. In-group preference. In-group preference, which gets us in trouble over and over again. And yet it also seems to cohere us. So that's where like some of this old gods thing, right? Like, what do we do with that? That seems to be the pattern. How do we liberalism tried one way of dealing with that. I don't know what the other way is, right? But it's here. Uh, Mild hierarchy, not absolute, but there's some way of like somebody knows what to do, right? The elder, somebody's better at teaching us how to fish, like whatever it might be. So mild hierarchy, which is different from domination, and social learning and teaching, which is the book is The Blueprint by Nicholas Christakis. Social learning and teaching, which I love. Particularly one of these shipwrecked people, like out in the cold, in one of the Arctic expeditions, like one guy went to get help for like 2 years. They spent time teaching each other French, teaching each other like different things. Like there's something about social learning that keeps us together, which is really fascinating. This is really the last bit I'll share because it's connected. Margaret Whitley writes a beautiful book called Who Do We Choose to Be? Interesting, she rewrites a second edition of that book and rewrites 80% of it. Now, Margaret Whitley has holds a very strong pole in this conversation. She's convinced that this civilization, like all civilizations, is headed for collapse and that it is imminent, right? Like imminent. So I'm not saying that I'm not quite ready, right, to fully accept what she's saying. I'm dancing with the possibility. So what she's saying, the only thing we got to do now is build islands of sanity. Islands of sanity. And these are spaces that serve as refuge, right? Refuges for leadership, for wisdom, for service, an alternative to the widespread dysfunction of the modern world. And now I'm going to read some of the attributes of those. These islands of sanity are grounded in meaning and service. They have leadership as a practice of presence and integrity. They focus on creating healthy human relationships. They resist the pull of fear and chaos. I love this one. Prioritize small, localized action over large-scale change. I want us to sit with that because I think part of the old playbook always is like, how do we change things for everybody right now? Now, that leaves us with attention in that climate change is this global problem, right? So I'm not saying I have an answer here, but this is what she's saying, and I find resonance with it. They embrace cyclical thinking and the wisdom of history. So there's something we can learn from history. They cultivate a disciplined hope, not a naive optimism. So let me say something about that. Hope here, so optimism or pessimism, which Mark Whitley can often sound pessimistic, is close the future. It's going to be good or it's going to be bad. Hope is born of despair, right? And it is a honing mechanism for us to find novelty, to find a better way. Finally, they hold space for the future. That's Whitley. My last bit here on whatever we need to do, which I don't have the full answer to, I think is we need to live life on life's terms. That's key. Because I feel like so much of liberalism and modernity is a rebellion against life's terms. What do I mean by life's terms? That we are of the nature to die and we cannot escape death. That we are the nature to get sick and we cannot escape sickness. That we are the nature to get old and we cannot escape old age. That everything around us is subject to change and will change. And that we're subject to the consequences of our actions, as it is self-evident right now. That's one. Live lives on life's terms. Be humble before the mystery, which I declare to be understand that there are forces greater than yourselves, right? Whatever that might be, whether you call it God or nature or the mystery. And live as the keepers of the ember. I know it's nicer to say the keepers of the flame, but the keepers of the ember means is no matter what the shit show brings, no matter what, we will live in a way that maintains the wisdom of the elders and the ancestors, even if it is an ember, so that even if just a few of us left, whoever's next can light a fire with it. Shay, thank you so much for your time
Ashe.
and for your patience with my little energetic move there. Um, Nicole, let's see people's face. I got somebody. Thank you, love. I got somebody who's got unmuted that's been kind of coughing a little bit. So if you don't mind muting yourself, that will help. And I do not pretend to have answers, but I'm glad to be in conversation. Both any questions or comments. If you raise your hand, it's easier for us to identify you and unmute you.
Hmm.
Yes, Larry.
Simple question. Where are you?
I uh, I live in the great city of Boston, but I find myself right now in Columbus, Ohio,
Hmm.
yeah, which is where my wife lives. So my wife and I live in separate places for now. My wife is Tuesday, by the way, who came here and grounded me when I seem to be losing it. Let's get a thank you, Larry. Welcome. Let's get
Thank
a kill. A very important question, by the way. Very important question, given what we're talking about. A kill.
Uh, Hope you're feeling better now.
I am. I am.
Yeah. Extremely powerful. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. Um, I really, I don't know whether like is not the right word. I don't want to say I like how clear-eyed you are about it, the grim nature of the things facing us. I wish we didn't have to face it in those ways, but I really appreciate the fact that you're honest about how tough things are going to be, especially about. I liked what you said, keep us the embers, uh, which is a very grim acknowledgement of what might come to pass. Still hope that it doesn't. But yeah, I don't have any specific comment other than just to say that this was very powerful. So I know you said in the beginning that this is the first time that you are kind of sharing all of these thoughts. So I just wanted to share that feedback and just say thank you.
Oh, that's very affirming. Thank you so much. That really means a lot to me. Thank you, thank you. I want to say one thing, which I often say when I speak about the grimness of the times, which is there's we have a if we take a 70,000 year perspective, we realize that we have survived multiple apocalypses, and that all it takes is looking at some of the people of color on the screen right now, the colonized, right, the settled upon, the formerly enslaved, and that doesn't exclude white folks because, you know, the Romans, for example, right, taking away people's understanding of it. It's just like it's just something that we do all over the world over time, and somehow we have the songs and the stories. Um, so there's a knowing. Our songs have it, our stories have it, and our bodies have it. And I think remembering that is essential. Essential. Um, how about you, Marisol?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Gibran, and Tuesday, for grounding and for you to come back and with the breath. I'm really grateful for what you're sharing. That's why I'm showing up. I think just to reflect back to you, G, that one of the biggest things that resonate is like you mentioning this moment calls for an embodiment. I think that really felt true to me. And I'm also reflecting in what we call like this long view, right? When we think about where we've been, where we are and where we might be going. And I thought of there was this moment as you were describing it that when you said the word initiations, right? And it sort of reminded me of 2020 when we were hit with the pandemic. and how we talked about how hard that felt. There was a moment of contending with something, such as that. And then taking a step further into grief, about the power of grief and turning towards it as well. When something is not of our preference, liking, or understanding, or something that we thought where we would be, right? And just for context, I'm 46 and also 2 decades in activism. So resonating deeply with a lot of what you shared. But I'll end with like thinking of something that, Gibran, your talk today reminds me of Bayo Akomolafe, when he often talks about, you mentioned a couple times, the power of the mountains, and also when he often references who are the gods of the cracks, right? So leaning into these spaces that you're talking about, is this place of like evolving, learning, remembering, and growing. And so I'm just going to take with me that you've always taught me, at least, right? In moments of difficulty, you'll say, take a breath into your heart because we have the capacity to expand here. And so in difficult moments, I'm also practicing with you, loving that I don't know what I don't know, but that trusting the truth of like our body's wisdom
Ashe.
and where we're going.
Ashe. Thank you, Marisol. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much for your presence. Elena, I'm seeing you. Let me say a quick word because I'm known for not always saying every name of every person I've been influenced by. Um, I do want to say the whole strong gods frame, um, I got directly from like the idea that from a guy called Alexander Boehner, and he's got a new channel called Kainos, Kainos. I make an effort to spend time with people that are heterodox in their thinking. So that's very important. You will find things there that will not please um, some of your left comfort zones. But that's the only way I think we can learn. So I just wanted to say that. I have
Thanks,
Elena.
Mary.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you, Steph. Go ahead, Elena.
Yeah, just thank you so very much. It was very rich, insightful, wise, and moving, like
Mm,
moving. What I wanted to know, Gibran, is if you're planning to put your thesis into writing,
mm,
because what I appreciated the most is that you drew from different like sources to make a case, and from each thing there were like the weird thing and the storm gods and like and I just I'm still thinking in the old mode that's dying, by the
mm.
way, but the
Yes.
A to C, and I would just love to have it, like handy for my own practice. But thank you. I joined the crowd that says it's been over for a while,
Mhm,
and now we're just seeing the whole thing die in front of our eyes.
mm,
So I just loved that your ending, which brought me almost to tears. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you for your and yeah, we have been resonating for a while on this stuff, and look, yeah, I would love to put it in writing. All of this stuff is done out of the side of my desk, as you know. It's not what I get paid for. So, you know, like little stars here, some person with money or some funder says, "Hey, let's help put some of this stuff in writing or in produce it as better video or whatever it might be." We'll receive it. But everything is done from the side of my desk. So this is the best I can do right now. I'm gonna let Will speak before I kill guess again, and then we'll let Akil come back in. Go ahead, Will. Thank you for being here, man.
This was wonderful, Javon. I'm so glad I jumped on. I'm just really buzzing, and I took a million notes. And um, I think the theurgism, uh, really fascinating, really resonant with some stuff I've been wondering about. Walter Brueggemann, in a sort of Christian context, writes about the prophetic sort of invocation of a free God, and
Mhm.
how the imperial God, or the God of the established church, is a captive God who lives in the temple or
That's
lives in the
beautiful.
church. and to know that there's a free God out there in the world who might be dangerous, but might also come to our aid or might come
Mm.
to afflict our enemies is a powerful idea that we should be seeking to pray on and meditate on. Um,
Mm. Love that.
Additionally, just your last little notes on living life on life's terms, humility before the mystery as well, really made me think about another touchstone of mine lately, which is um, the Earthsea books by Ursula Le Guin.
Yes.
Folks have read those. That whole series of 6 is so, I think, deeply about like first facing the shadow and then um, deconstructing a system of belief, deconstructing modernity, and then learning to live life on life terms and engage a great turning or a historical revolution from a position that is humble rather than having to be about um, great deeds. And so just another reference point, and I think you're just affirming so much of the wisdom that I found in those books. This is Ursula Le Guin. I'm talking about. It's confusing because I see Greg comment. Ursula Le Guin wrote about Earthsea, and then Octave Butler wrote about Earthseed, and they're both actually very Taoist in their derivation and inspiration. So there's a lot of work to be done on putting those in conversation as well.
Thank you so much. Well, I want to say a word about that. Well, thank you for bringing art in. I think art is a much better way to understand any of these things than theory, than like kind of. So just want to say that. Yeah, and part of what I'm sensing is that two things. There is kind of an ancestral wisdom that precedes, um, yeah, this kind of captive gods, and that maybe the way to return to the old gods is to like go farther back, go farther back. At the same time, I'm always aware of something called what the pre-post fallacy, the pre-post fallacy, and which is the idea that our ancestors lived in some idyllic perfection, and that all we gotta do is return to that, right? Like that's a myth. Like that's not true, right? Like just ask like anybody that didn't fit their whatever power structure of the time. Like it's just not the case. So I just think it's important. Like whatever we're doing, I call it a forward-facing remembering. Like from here, from right here, from what we've learned here, we remember what we've forgotten, and we keep moving forward. We're not trying to go back. So I just want to say that. Um, Okay, so Akil, I'm gonna give you a minute here. We got Jess and Raptor. I want to make sure I get to them. I was sad to lose Pam and Tom, but let's see if we can get through a couple more before 1:30.
Yeah, thanks again, Gibran. Just reflecting on what you shared in response to my comment that the fact that we've been here 70,000 years and we have survived a lot that has come before. I think maybe when you share the talk that you just gave us to the world at large, it might be a good idea to emphasize more on that because currently, like, I ended the talk feeling a little grim, right? Grim but determined.
Yeah,
But just calling that fact out that um, we do not yet know how this might turn out, and we
that's
have
right.
survived a lot in the past. And maybe I don't like, I'm sure you have many other examples that you could cite where hope seemed lost and like, things turned out for the better in the future. So uncertainty definitely leads to fear, but uncertainty also means that we do not know like that's going to be bad for sure. So I think I'm very glad I shared that reflection with you and you shared that back. I think it might leave folks more uplifted if you share
Yeah,
that.
thank you. Very, very, very helpful. I agree with that, and it resonates. It makes me think of like when you think about migrants, right? The people that are being attacked right now. These people are working the poorest jobs here and still sending money back home, right? Like there is something in us that knows how to sacrifice for whoever's coming next, right? And that's something that we in our super spoiled comforts seem to have forgotten, right? So how do we remember what it's like to live? And then we have this entire system that actually steals from our descendants, right? Never mind, never mind, live for them. So that's I think the kind of mindset that is called for. The Jess and Rafter, I'm gonna go with Pam and Tom just to honor our elders here, respectfully calling you elders, but but honoring what we believe. So just the white hair. Maybe you're just as young, but the white hair. Go ahead. You're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Hebron. Just to say where we are in Madrid, and this morning I woke up in Brussels, and I've been walking in the rubble of empires past. Before our balcony, the Santa Inquisición used to march people down the street within that 400-year period. And so we're living in all of these simultaneous historical currents. But I wanted to say something else. I have had the exquisite privilege of knowing you for over a decade. And I just want to say that while what you have brought before us today is a masterpiece in process, I recognize almost all of the pieces.
That's nice.
From here, from there, from maybe men's work, from money work, from social movement work, from travels, from whatever it is. And it's because you have always been an open source curator, creator of enormous artistry, ready to do the dangerous fucking work of figuring yourself out in front of and among others. And what I feel like I have witnessed today is precisely the integration you're inviting us to explore with you. And I'm not putting it up on a pedestal because you aren't, you don't, it won't be. It's only down here in the muck.
Right. That's the only place. Yes.
That's the only place. And you put it on a pedestal, you kill it. And I know I see you putting out, but not putting yourself up, and bringing us in. And I just want to honor those gestures. I want to tell you how moved I am. It's just beautiful to be in community, in love with you. And I also just want to say one other thing. You invited us at one point to explore resentment.
Yes.
As a thing, as a habit of mind that is the inability to integrate the shadow, right?
That's right.
And I remember thinking about this and discovering how it is the escape from facing and truly integrating. And it's the obverse of the habits of mind that integration calls us to.
That's right.
And so I'm left here with this huge challenge of, okay, what are these habits, not just of mind, habits of spirit, habit of body, habit of intellect, of the whole package. What are those practices now, those habits, those new habits that we need to turn to? And I'm really excited to go through the things that you've shared with us and ask myself, what's the habit there? What's the habit there? What's the habit there? Because each one of these pieces is also a practice.
Ashe.
Anyway, I'm just bubbling here. I'm going to stop.
I receive it. Thank you. Gracias. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Very moved by your words. And you know, the thing I really want to write, we've been wanting to write for a long time. The working title of it is Against Resentment, a post-woke manifesto. And it's really a direct challenge to any political ideology that justifies resentment as a practice, whatever side, right and left. We are embedded in the politics of resentment. And that is the poison that is corroding our souls. And it is the opposite of the path of wisdom. The path of wisdom is a narrow path. It's a hard path. It is not an easy path. All right, I see your hand, Pamela.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that, yes, I love that idea of going against resentment. And at the beginning, you said it's liberalism is in crisis. and I'm not going to defend, I'm not going to go for liberalism. I'm not going to defend. And I love that. And then at the end, you said, let's face the strong gods. Let's face the crisis of liberalism. And I would add, let's to go against these resentments and not defend liberalism. We need to face contradictions and tensions in our practice.
That's right. That's right.
Right?
That's
And
beautiful.
that is hard to do, but I think yeah, I'm a materialist, historical materialist, and I think when you deal with tensions and contradictions, and you find the ways in which you can do that and get through this defending liberalism, not defending it. So no, yeah. Anyway.
Gracias, gracias. Ashe, gracias por estar aquí. So honored that you're here both times. Thank you so much. Thank you. What do you got for us, Jess?
I mean, maybe connected with all of that, just first, it's just good to be in your percolations and for bringing us into that. I thank you. And when you were sharing about at the end living life on its terms and you had that list, your list, what came through to me is also that we are of the nature to suffer. And and I feel that's part of where resentments come. One of my teachers talked about like the simplest things from a Buddhist perspective of when we want something we cannot have, when we have something but it's not actually what we want, when we're separated from those we love, or we have to endure people we don't love. And it's like that simple, but there's something about the opportunity and actual choice and capacity we have to turn away from suffering. The suffering is here, it's like part of life, but we have a way we can relate to it differently. And I'm really curious, Marisol, you talked about it a little bit, but also the ways we're learning how to be with that in our bodies and how to, it's not just a mental thing, but there's an embodiment and a understanding how our bodies are turning away from and processing and being with the suffering that is around us.
That's powerful, Jess. Thank you so much for saying that. Because I do feel like the entire structure, like West, like post-war, like after all of that suffering, like so much of it, yeah, it's like we have a whole culture that is in resentment against life and its terms, right? So like death, old age, sickness, change. That's hard. That's the hard shit. Like, and that's the human shit. And like no one gets a pass from it, right? From that kind of grief. But we live either afraid of it or in resistance to it. And so we begin, like, for me, it's outrageous, right? That we would gather in any space that is designed to create social movement or transformation and then be upset if something upsetting happens, right? It's just like, what are we demanding? What are we asking of the world? Like it's like, no, like with the whole point of healing is not to be protected from life's terms, is to build the wisdom and the resilience and the fortitude and the capacity to face life's terms and to do it together. Because I think that's the other part, is we're trying to do it alone. And none of us can ever succeed at that one either. So thank you for that. Rafter, I saw you put your hand up, but we seem to have a minute longer here. Let's see if you got something else.
Well, that was a good closing note, if you wanted to
Okay.
call it right there. I'm deeply grateful to be in this space and to be hearing you tying all these different pieces of ideas, a lot of which I've heard from you in pieces, but not all of them. And the piece about the strong gods and the return of the strong gods as is really resonating with me in things that ideas that I've been working with around the way that humans have evolved belief. Everywhere you look, human cultures evolved to think of themselves as in relationship with agencies and powers around them in the natural world. And that is actually part of how we've survived. That is like an
Yes.
evolutionary adaptation to understand ourselves as in relationship.
Yes, sir.
And that if we cut ourselves off from that, we cut ourselves off from part of our intelligence, part of our capacity to solve problems, part of our capacity to survive.
Yes.
Um, and that, um, and so I'm thinking about other, putting that in dialogue with this question of strong gods, not just as sort of like, not as only a shadow, not as
Mhm.
only like a source of fusion of identity that we're vulnerable to, but
Yes.
also as like a reservoir of power if we face it
Ashe.
and own it,
Yeah.
with integrity.
Ashe. That's my belief. I mean, thank you thereafter. And we will close with this, and very aligned with what you're saying. I think of myself as a neo-animist, right? And I believe in my bones, in my soul, that I know to be true. I will affirm that we all come from a people that understood that the river has a spirit and that the mountain has a spirit. That if a bird flies above, it means something. That if you talk to a tree and wait long enough to listen, it will speak back to you. All of us have that understood. We come from that. That is in ourselves. The remembering is not lost knowledge. It's how we've been. It is us. It is what we are. Like today you can light a fire. Today you can sing a song. Today you can beat a drum. Today you can talk to a tree and you can worship at the river. Today, with whatever knowledge you have, it can be done right now. And so that kind of remembering is essential. So I am 100% with you that the strongest can be dangerous, but they're also, if we are in right and humble relationship, right? And if we don't get shaken when like the tribe next door has a different definition of them, right? Like if we can dance with each other, right? And I feel like the European Enlightenment project of the isolated self breaks us from relationship with each other, breaks us with relationship with our ancestors, which then breaks our relationship with our descendants. And the only way you steal from your descendants in the violent way that we're doing, you leave your descendants without a planet, is by forgetting that you have ancestors and forgetting that everything is connected to everything else, which is what our ancestors knew. And that's what we need to remember. So with that in mind, I'll finish like I did in the middle when I needed a moment. I'll take a moment to again call in and thank the spirits and the allies who are always with us and rise up to meet us when our intention is high and our prayer is strong. Lay your hands upon these good people. Continue to bless them, guide them, steer them, protect them, their families. May anybody they touch and anybody they see come to know you in the kindness of their gaze and the gentleness of their smile. May they find courage in times of fear. May they come to know they're loved and held. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Many, many blessings. Thank you so much. What an honor. Really appreciate y'all.